Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we conclude with Part 3, The Key to the Atlantic Fable and Supplementary Notes. From Atlantis, an interpretation by Manly P. Hall. The Key to the Atlantic Fable. Marcellus, in his History of Ethiopia, wrote of Atlantis, "For they relate that in their time there were 7 islands in the Atlantic Sea, sacred to Proserpine, and besides these 3 others of an immense magnitude, one of which was sacred to Pluto, another to Ammon, and another, which is the middle of these and is of 1,000 stadia, to Neptune." The most learned of the interpreters of Plato were the Neoplatonists of Alexandria. Neoplatonism flourished in the first centuries of the Christian era and included a number of outstanding thinkers. Among these should be mentioned Porphyry, Proclus, Iamblichus, and Syrianus. To these may be added the name of Origen, the ante-Nicene father, whose opinions on many subjects were definitely Platonic. The Neoplatonists agreed that the story of Atlantis should be accepted as both historical and allegorical, but they were at variance as to the true interpretation. Certain opinions of these learned men form the basis of my interpretation. The Orphic theology, which is the true foundation of the Greek philosophical system, is an exceedingly intricate and profound subject. The keys to the allegorical Atlantis story are to be found in the ritualism and fantasy of the Orphic rites. The Orphics divided the universe, visible and invisible, into 3 parts. The Orphic initiate Pythagoras named these parts in descending order: the supreme world, the superior world, and the inferior world. The supreme world was the abode of pure truth and consisted of one single substance and essence, the divine nature itself, formless and unbegotten, eternal and incorruptible. The superior world was the dwelling place of the principles, the gods, the qualities and manifestations of the divine nature. Here dwelt the causes of all material phenomena, invisible in their own natures but visible through their manifestations. The lowest or inferior world was the plane of corruptible forms, the sphere of bodies and of such tangible natures as have beginning and end. The inferior world frequently is referred to as the sphere of generation. The 3 worlds in the terminology of the Orphics are referred to as the bodies of the blessed gods. Heaven or Uranus ruled the first or supreme world. Kronos, the aged god of the crooked tooth, devourer of his own progeny, ruled the superior world. Zeus, the demiurgus or material creator, from his ethereal throne controlled the destiny of the inferior world. For our purpose, it should be especially remembered that Zeus is the 3rd person of the great triad of gods, lord of the physical universe, regent of matter in all of its forms and conditions, and the chief of the order of gods which rule the planets, stars, constellations, and elements. The ancients recognized 3 conditions of matter. The highest they termed airy or intellectual, the second they termed watery or spermatic, and the third they termed earthy or corporeal. These 3 conditions of matter were therefore properly termed the 3 natures of Zeus. They personified the 3 parts of matter, regarding them as the bodies and abodes of the principal mundane gods. The airy or intellectual region they allotted to Zeus under the form of Jupiter Ammon. The watery or spermatic they allotted to Zeus Poseidon, or Zeus, lord of the humid ethers. And the earthy or corporeal part they allotted to Zeus Hades, or the subterranean Zeus, lord of the underworld. In this way, Zeus, the airy intellectual part of the material world, dominated the 3 conditions or states of matter, fashioning them into the cosmos through the powers conferred upon him by the supermundane gods who abode in the superior sphere far beyond the cognition of mortals. The material creation of worlds, or more correctly, their material generation or manifestation, therefore, occurred on 3 planes sequentially. There was first the world idea which arose in the mind of Zeus on the plane of airy intellect. It is therefore explained that Zeus first contemplated the abyss, or outer space, matter, and envisioned the pattern of the worlds. This pattern of intellectual conception of creation then descended into the watery or spermatic level, where it became what Plato called the archetype. The creative forming power passed from Zeus to Poseidon. That is, the newly formed universe came under the laws of the etheric, humid, germinating sphere. At this stage, we enter upon the actual beginning of the Atlantean allegory. It should be remembered that the universe was not yet visible as a corporeal body. Rather, the germs of the universe had been immersed in the seminal fluids of space. The principle of bodybuilding, of forming and reproducing, was being developed within the spiritual nature of the world. Poseidon, the personification of humidity and moisture, was the peculiar guardian and god of this project. The supermundane gods, acting through Zeus, distributed space to the 12 zodiacal orders of gods. To the last of these, Poseidon, lord of the constellation of the fishes, was assigned the empire of the watery element. It was here that he was to establish his kingdom and rule over it. It should not be interpreted that Poseidon merely received the watery parts of the planet Earth. At the time the gods distributed the universe, there was no earth and no sea as we know them. The sea over which Poseidon was given rulership was the humidity of space within which the forms of the world were to be built. In the allegory, the universal place of generation is set forth in terms of the form of the solar system with its planets, or of the earth with its zones. Having received his allotment, Poseidon began the process of fashioning his world. The humid ethers of the watery diffusion were divided by the Greeks into two parts, the one denoting a spirituous state and the other a grosser or sedimentary. Working through the higher parts of the ether upon the lower parts, therefore, Poseidon is said to have brought them together or united them. The higher ether was called Evenor, and the lower ether Leucippe. From their union was produced Plato, or the etheric body of the solar system. Plato is referred to as an orphan because her very emergence was the result of the union of the extremes which produced her. And the extremes themselves ceased to exist when their equilibrium had been accomplished. As hydrogen and oxygen disappear as pure elements in the visible compound of water, so the etheric extremes lost their identity in their own progeny. The family of Plato is referred to as barbaric or primitive because it represented the humid substance itself, irrational and uncultured, until it was quickened or related into manifestation through the overshadowing of intelligence. When the humid body of the solar system of the planet was prepared, the god Poseidon took upon himself a humid form described in the Chaldaic oracles as serpentine, that is, vibratory. In this form he united with Clito, and from this union was born a tetractys, the Pythagorean pattern of 10 dots. The key to the entire formula of material generation. These 10 dots are likewise the 10 brothers, the framework of the material world and the common denominator of all magnitude and multitude. Let us now pause for a moment to review several important points. In the quotation from Marcellus, it is stated that the Atlantic continent consisted of 7 islands sacred to Proserpine, and 3 immense continents, one sacred to Jupiter, the second to Pluto, and the third, between these two, to Neptune. The 3 great continents represent the 3 parts of the inferior world of Pythagoras, the airy, the watery, and the earthy. The central continent between the extremes, the abode of Poseidon, is the location of the watery empire Atlantis. The 7 smaller islands sacred to Proserpine are the planets which surround the body of the sun in the solar system, or the 7 continents, which emerge sequentially from the imperishable island with its zones of land and water in the evolution of life itself. In describing the 10 numbers, Pythagoras said that there were 2 orders of numbers, numeration and numerals. The numerations are the souls of the numbers, and the numerals are the bodies of the numerations. He explains thus: unity is the numeration called the monad, and the number 1 is the body of that numeration. The monad symbolizes the one as all, and the numeral symbolizes the all as one. The numerations are the subjective patterns or ideas, and the numerals are the shadows of these patterns cast in the physical substances of the world. In the Atlantic fable, the 10 sons of Plato are the numerations, monad, dual, triad, tetrad, etc., the principles of the numbers. By the same analogy, the Atlantic Empire was to our material creation as we now know it what the numerations are to the numbers, that is, it was the archetype, the pattern, the principle which was to manifest through personality. To understand this is to grasp the true significance of Plato's allegory. Now to resume the story. The oldest of the sons of Poseidon was Atlas, who bears the world upon his shoulders. Atlas is a form of Adam. Both names are derived from the root at or ad. As Adam was the first of the 10 patriarchs, so Atlas is the first of the 10 princes of Atlantis, and the monad is the first and chief of the numerations. Atlas, representing the monad or unity, is therefore given rulership over the whole world, which he must support by the principle of unity. In other words, the universe is sustained by its own oneness. The other brothers, each of whom esoterically represents a law and the principle working within and under unity, are given principalities. That is, they are assigned spheres of manifestation. They are given rulerships over orders of seminal life. In the meantime, Poseidon, as the great sea serpent, turns the waters of space into the nebular spherical form of the globe. The key to the symbolism is apparent, for in the account of Atlantis, Poseidon is described as turning out the concentric zones as though upon a lathe, even and symmetrical in all their parts. In the midst of the bands or zones is a mountain rising in the middle of the imperishable land or island. We know from the Egyptians and the Greeks that this central mountain represents the sun in the solar system, and in the planetary arrangement, the polar mountain, Meru or Olympus, the abode of the gods. This part of the symbolism could be developed at great length. In the Norse theology, the mountain Asgard with its 3 temples rises in the middle of the earth and is surrounded by the zones and sea, the outer extremity of which is a wall formed of the eyebrows of Ymir, the primordial giant, a type of Atlas. Plato refers to the central island of Atlantis as an acropolis, where are gathered temples and great buildings which surround the golden-domed shrine of Poseidon. Elera Poseidon is the invisible sun which, in the words of Paracelsus, lights the humid worlds as our physical sun lights the material world. The zones with which Poseidon surrounds the central island represent the orbits of the planets. 5 in number. In the old system, the sun and moon were not planets. In the development of the Earth itself, these zones are the magnetic bands which have descended to us under the symbolism of the 5 belts, that is, the equator, the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer, and the Arctic and Antarctic circles. There then is the angelic world described in the vision of Milton, the paradisiacal sphere where humanity dwelt before the mysterious and symbolical fall. Here was the empire of the kings of Edom, which has vanished in the abyss. Here was the race of the demigods, the old order which has passed away. Here was the council of the Aces, the 12 Nordic gods who perished in the Götterdämmerung. Here was the pre-Adamic world, not prehistorical in the physical sense, but pre-physical in the historic sense. This was the race of the shadows, an intangible creation abiding in the humid essences of the middle region. Here then also is the true root of mythologies, of folklore, of fairy stories. From Atlantis come the accounts of the little people, the nymphs, the dryads, and that whole race of intangible creatures that float in the atmosphere above the cold surface of our own visible globe. These are the children of the fire mist, the progeny of Poseidon, the spermatic life that came down to our physical plane hundreds of millions of years ago to become all the physical species and genera that we know through the process of adaptation and evolution. The account then proceeds with a description of the glories of the Atlantean Empire. Bridges were built to connect the zones. A canal was dug to unite the outer sea with the inner island. This single statement conceals the whole mystery of the esoteric system, the priesthood, and the creation of the state mysteries. The laws given by Poseidon were preserved, and the race of Atlantis flourished and grew richer than all the races and kingdoms that would come after. This is the story of the Golden Age so beautifully set forth by Hesiod in his Theogony. This was before the Battle of the Titans, and as is specifically noted in the account, prior to the Trojan War. When the Egyptians discoursed with Solon on the Atlantic myth, they likewise ridiculed the barbarism and ignorance of the Greeks. As might be expected from a rival culture, the Egyptians ingeniously employed the prehistoric Greeks to symbolize the lowest corporeal part of nature. We must now consider the symbolism of Hades, or the subterranean Zeus, lord of the physical world. Hades is the physical body of the sun in the solar system and the physical body of the planet in the planetary system. It likewise represents the physical part of all embodied life. The descent of the consciousness or intelligence into the material form is declared to be a descent into Hades. The physical life itself is the purgatorial sphere where spirits wander, exiled in the dark caverns of form which represent all the laws and bodies of physical nature. The figure of Zeus Hades was formulated in the mysteries. His throne stands in the midst of a great subterranean cavern gouged out of space and set aside as a place of travail. Birth guards the entrance and death the exit. All of nature must depart by the appointed gates. Berosus, the historian of the Chaldeans, declared that when the earth itself was in the forming, it produced from itself composita, monsters with many heads, strange, misshapen creatures that lived and died before the dawn of reason. These were the bodies, the snares, the nets which were to trap the souls of men. Thus it is that the Egyptian priests in their allegory called the empire of Hades Hellenic. They likewise showed that this world was divided from the Atlantic continents by a great sea. This is the Sea of Ether, the humid ghost world that divides the states of being. In the Atlantic account, the kings of Atlantis resolved to conquer the states of Greece. As the human soul descends into this physical body for the sake of experience and enters upon the tribulations of the flesh, so it was written that in ancient times a part of the angels rebelled, and growing proud were cast from the heavenly light. The rebellion of the angels is the story of the lost Atlantis. The same is contained in the biblical statement that the sons of God, beholding the daughters of the earth, and seeing them to be fair, descended unto them and conceived by them a race of giants. When Zeus and the gods perceived the pride that had entered into the hearts of the Atlanteans, a council was called upon the great central throne to determine the fate of the rebellious race. It is here that Plato's narrative ends. Why? Was it true that he never finished the account? Or was his writing destroyed? This we shall probably never know. It seems probable, however, that the reason for the destruction of the manuscript, or for its incompletion, belongs among the mysteries of the old initiations. Plato could say no more without revealing the true meaning of the whole story. The very words that Zeus would have to speak would expose a mystery. Therefore, all that remains of the story is the account of the disaster, during which both the Greeks and the Atlanteans perished together, and with them the memories and the records of the old order. When the Atlanteans, the seminal souls, descended into bodies in their war with matter, they lost the memory of their own celestial origin. The story describes the submergence of the Atlantic islands. The whole ethereal empire fell together into a material state and vanished in the abyss of matter. Gone were the palaces, the temples, the great walls, and the glory. Yet the old Atlantis is not truly gone. It is now emerging through man. The civilization we are building today is the resurrection of Atlantis. The souls that descended into matter are now struggling to extricate themselves and are emerging gradually into the light of reason. Why do all nations and peoples preserve a record of the deluge and the race that existed prior to the destruction? The answer is simple. It is the story of the origin of man himself. The whole physical human race is the fallen Atlanteans. Atlantis was the homeland from which we have come to our present estate. This was generally known to ancient peoples, but this knowledge has been lost through the vicissitudes of time. The ancient Hindus declare that the human life wave comprises approximately 60 billion entities. These are symbolized by the 60 million who perished in the Atlantean deluge. In the esoteric numerology, 64 million is the exact figure given. In the Pythagorean theory, the number 64 is an evenly even number because it can be divided back to unity without remainder by the formulas seen here. 64 is also the perfect number of the Chinese trigrams, or of the numbers governing the physical creation. If the 6 and the 4 be added, the result is 1. It is the diversity concealing the monad. It is therefore like the word ADM, a symbol of species or types, and represents an entire hierarchy or order of living things rather than a specific number of persons. Here is the key to the old theological doggerel. With Adam's fall, we sinned us all. The Atlantic civilization describes the descent of living souls individualized under the constellation of Pisces from their previous ethereal state into material form at the beginning of human evolution upon the planet. Making use of the records of the historical deluge, which had occurred several thousands of years earlier, Plato, by combining the accounts, revealed and yet concealed much of the deepest mysticism of the Greek esoteric science. He exposed nothing but intimated much. And coming finally to the place where he could say no more without revealing all, he followed the admonition of Harpocrates. He became silent. Supplementary notes. Leo Frobenius, in his The Voice of Africa, ties his entire analysis of the origins of African culture to a peculiar phase of the Atlantis hypothesis. He points out that beneath the surface of African culture, there is a strong surviving tradition of a powerful prehistoric civilization which declined long ago. The religious beliefs of the people, their arts, legends, symbols, rituals, and architecture all indicate that at some remote period, the Dark Continent had direct contact with some advanced social group. Frobenius gives special thought to the area involving Ife, northern Yoruba, and Great Benin. Referring to the Yoruban civilization, Frobenius writes that it must be declared essentially African. By this I mean to say that it not only rests upon the surface of African soil like a bubble blown from abroad, which a breath can also dispel, but rather that it is actually incorporated with it. We are then faced with the question whether it was here developed or transplanted hither. That is, whether we are to regard it as autogenetic or in symphonic relation to foreign civilizations. The question is, did it originate in this country itself, or if it was brought from beyond? Which was the road that it took? The same author then points out that many of the basic concepts of the Yorubans find their counterparts among the ancient Etruscans. The culture is pre-Christian, but points to a solid attainment which became both a traditional and a biological inheritance. Frobenius then attempts to identify the mysterious people of the West with the Tertia fleet, which passed eastward through the Pillars of Hercules in the 13th century BC. If rather dramatically, Frobenius summarizes his concepts thus: "And this is the method by which I maintain I have rediscovered Atlantis, the emporium of the culture of the West on the further side of the Straits of Gibraltar. That Atlantis, whose walls, as Solon informs us, held within them Poseidon's castle, where there was a wealth of luxuriant vegetation, where tree-like plants grew which gave forth food and drink and unguents, oil palm. That a fruit tree with quickly decaying fruit, banana, and desirable condiments, pepper, there flourished abundantly. That elephants lived there, that bronze or brass was won there, as till recently was so behind the Yoruban mountain range, that the natives wore dark blue, tree indigo garments, and that they had a somewhat foreign style of architecture, ridge roofs of palm leaves. There is a supplementary bulletin on ancient continents, issued by the United States Department of the Interior, Office of Education, Washington, D.C., relating to a broadcast given January 26, 1937 over NBC on the subject, Did Atlantis Exist? It is interesting to note that this bulletin, which consists of 3 pages of single-spaced typing, in no way questions the possibility or reasonableness of the Atlantis hypothesis. It even mentions Donnelly's book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. On the front page of the bulletin, Atlantis is indicated as occupying the greater part of the Atlantic Ocean area. On the eastern side, it extends downward from southern England to the westernmost point of Africa. On the western side, it extends southward from approximately Cape Hatteras to Cuba. The area involved would be considerably larger than the United States. This bulletin gathers the case for Atlantis under 4 headings. 1. Such a catastrophe as the sinking of Atlantis was possible. 2. The floor of the Atlantic once stood at a much higher level than at present. 3. There is a ridge between 6,000 and 8,000 feet high running through the Atlantic Ocean. 4. Similar or identical species of plants and animals exist on continents separated by oceans. These 4 points are individually considered with scientific verification from facts already established. A paragraph in connection with the 3rd point will indicate the general attitude. Deep sea soundings have revealed a great elevation or ridge which rises about 8,000 feet above the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, and it reaches the surface of the ocean in the Azores and other islands. This ridge must have been above the water once upon a time because the mountains and valleys of its surface could never have been produced except by agencies acting above the water. It is covered with volcanic ash, traces of which are found right across the ocean to the American coast. The bulletin goes on to emphasize flora and fauna common to the eastern and western hemispheres, which could not have been so distributed had there not at one time been land bridges. The bulletin points out that cotton probably originated in America and was transported to the Old World at a very early time. The banana also is found throughout tropical Asia and Africa and was cultivated in America before 1492. As it possesses no easily transportable bulbs and cannot be propagated by cutting or by seed, it could only have traveled by prehistoric human care or by land bridges. The more the situation is examined, the more reasonable it becomes to assume the existence of an ancient continent between America and Europe. While studying various natural testimonies, we should not forget the migrations of religions and of the essential spiritual convictions which underlie the rise of cultures. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.